Ecclesiastes chapter number 8. Ecclesiastes is categorized as a wisdom book. Chapter 8 especially has wisdom as its theme. Verse number 1 is going to ask, who is the wise man? And it's rare to find a wise man, but then he's going to give some traits of somebody that has true wisdom. He's going to end in verse number 17. We're talking about how that human wisdom is so shortcoming, that human wisdom can't find the ways of God. You've got to fear the Lord. Now, there's several topics that Solomon addresses in this chapter and relates it to wisdom and how that wisdom helps in difficult times. I'll give you the first one tonight, and I think that will be enough. But here's what wisdom does in Ecclesiastes chapter 8. Is wisdom teaches you to submit to authority. It teaches you to submit to authority. Look at verse number 1. Let's run through just a couple of verses. Who is as the wise man? Now, it's a rhetorical question. It's not meant to be answered. It's meant to make a point. And the implication is that the land is not flooded with wise men, but that wise men are a scarcity. That is true if you consider wisdom from a biblical perspective. The Bible makes it clear that all wisdom comes from God. All wisdom. Several times you read the phrase, to God only wise. He's the only one who truly has wisdom. That is why James said in James 1:5, if any man lack wisdom, if you need it, well, where are you going to get it from? Well, if any man lack wisdom, ask of God. Ask of God. Wisdom comes from God. And the first thing that wisdom would have you to do is fear God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The wisest thing that you could do, I was about to say, young person, the wisest thing anybody can do is to live in the fear of God. And if you'll do that, that will start you out on the pathway of wisdom. Now, that's true. The world doesn't believe that. The world says that wisdom comes from education. It comes from the mind of man, not from the mind of God. I said last week that there is a difference between knowledge and wisdom, but the world equates wisdom and education, knowledge, as the same. And I want to make this clear to our young people tonight. Nobody is going to tell you that you don't need an education, because there's no premium on ignorance. You need a good education. But there are a lot of educated fools in the world. The degrees and the titles behind a man's name is not an indicator of his wisdom. It's an indicator of his knowledge. I was thinking about this early this morning. Right now, the Democrats are trying to jockey with each other to see who can give away enough to become president. So now the thing is free college tuition. I think Bernie has a plan and Pocahontas has a plan, and they all have a plan. I think somebody said like $1.2 trillion in student loan debt in the United States. Here's what that is. That is people who could not afford college, but they went anyway and racked up huge amounts of debt. And now the Democrats want to create a tax for you to help pay off somebody else's college loan. I read an online article of some liberal professor crying. She said that she has a PhD. She's a professor in some university. Makes over $100,000 a year, but she has $180,000 in student loans. Now, I did the math, and I don't have a PhD. If you're making $100,000, if you live on 50 in 4 years, she could pay that off and have a little bit of extra. So she really could pay it off herself. So here's some good advice tonight. If you can't afford to go to college, don't go. If you do go, to pay your own debts. And if you get in over your head and you can't pay, don't blame me. All right? I went to college in 1986, my first year at Pensacola Christian College, and we were on a Christian service scholarship with my parents being full-time Christian workers. And I went for one semester, came home for the Christmas break. We didn't have the money for me to go back to college, so I didn't go. I stayed home and I worked. I worked in a hardware store trying to save up money to be able to go the following semester, all right? That was the way that we're going to do this. Now, here's what happened in my case. The church that my dad pastored at that time, they knew that when I graduated, they wanted me to come back as assistant pastor in that church. And so the men of the church got together and they voted to pay for my way through college for the next 4 years. The stipulation being that when I graduated, I wouldn't take a job somewhere else. I would come back to that church and I would go on staff there. Pretty good deal. And so the following semester, I was able to go back. And so I went 4 years and my tuition room and board was paid for. And that worked out really well. Now, the church didn't plan it real well because probably within a month of me graduating after college, church had a big blowout and they voted Dad out, and then they wanted me to go as well. So I was only staff for about a month. So they didn't really get their money's worth. But nevertheless, it's possible to have education but not have wisdom. In fact, look at a verse. Hold your finger right here. Proverbs chapter 19. Man, here's a great verse. In Proverbs 19 and verse number 27, cease, my son, to hear the instruction that causeth to err from the words of knowledge. There is some instruction that will cause you to err. There is instruction tonight that is a lie. That's not words of knowledge. There's some instruction that will lead you astray. Now, you know tonight that I have a holy disrespect for public education. I think that one of the best ways for you to lose your kids is to allow the world to educate them. It's more indoctrination than it is education. However, my wariness of public education doesn't stop at 12th grade. Personally, my wariness of public education extends to public college as well. Now, I know a kid wants to pursue a field or career. You have to have a certain degree and whatever it might be, and maybe you have to go to a state college to get that education. Be very careful. Be very careful. Because more of our kids have gone off to UWF or PJC or Auburn or wherever it might be and got the education, and they came out with that institution and they came out with more skepticism than they did faith. I'm just telling you that more of them have come out of that environment with more of the world and less of God in them. They got education, but they didn't get any wisdom. Be careful. So he says, who is as the wise man? He says, who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? To know the interpretation is to have it explained. To be able to read a situation and know how to respond. To be able to read a person and know how to react to that person. To be able to see what's happening around you as you live. He says, who is as the wise man? Who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom maketh his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed. Wisdom is in the heart, but wisdom also shows up in the face. Understanding of life. It'll make your eyes brighter. It'll help you smile. It'll give you confidence. It'll make you focused. In fact, the phrase, maketh his face to shine, that's found several times in the Bible that speaks of favor. The Lord make his face shine upon you means for the Lord to bless you. So wisdom brings the favor of God. So wisdom. So here's what Solomon is saying. He said, where is wisdom? What will wisdom do for you? And he's going to give you 3 or 4 difficult situations in life that if you have wisdom, it'll help you navigate that situation of life. And in verse number 2, the first one is it'll help you to submit to authority. The first area of life is authority, especially governmental authority. Now, in Solomon's day, government was in the hands of the king. We have three branches. We have a judicial, a legislative, and we have an executive. Power is supposed to be spread among those branches. But in Solomon's day, the king was the executive, legislative, and judicial. He was all three. And it made him a very powerful man. Whether he's a good king or a bad king, wise king, unwise king, it doesn't matter. So what does wisdom teach you and how to respond to authority? Look at verse 2. He said, I counsel thee to keep the king's commandment. The king is the authority. The counsel is to submit to his authority. There's a small group of Christians, Baptists, I guess, I've run across some of them, who think that it is spiritual to resist government. I'm not going to have a Social Security card. I'm not going to have a driver's license. I'm not filing a tax return. I'm not answering questions of a police officer. There's that nut in Arizona who made himself famous by not answering questions at the Border Patrol. So they think that that is spiritual. Now, all of us know that authority can be abusive. We've had crooked leaders. There have been crooked cops. And they may pass some laws that violate our Bible, that violate our Constitution, that laws that we can abide by. We have to be willing to pay the price for resisting. Well, those are extreme matters. In the natural, ordinary course of living, you are under an authority. And the counsel is keep the king's commandments. Somebody says, well, what if I don't have a king? Yeah, but you do have an authority. Very unpopular. I think you're okay with this. I know you are. The Bible still places the man over the household and still tells wives to submit to their husbands. The Bible still says that children should obey their parents, that servants, employees should obey their masters, employers. And we're in a generation that wants to cast off all of authority. Nobody is going to tell me what to do. Wisdom says, keep the king's commandment. It says in verse 3, be not hasty to go out of his sight. Stand not in an evil thing, for he doeth whatsoever pleaseth him. What if the authority is wrong? What if the authority makes a decision that I don't agree with? Again, there are times when civil disobedience is justified. There are times when you are compelled to disobey an authority. If your lost husband wants you to go bar hopping and wife swapping, then he's the authority, but I think you have the right to beat his head in with a skillet. However, don't be hasty to get away from the authority. Don't be so quick to get out from under the thumb of whatever king is in your life. Do not be hasty to go out of his sight. And usually what happens when a person does that is they stand in an evil thing. It is usually worse out from under the authority than it is being under an imperfect authority. And a lot of young people that turned 18, thank God, I am free indeed. I am out from under the oppressive reign of my parents. And then they found out that world was a whole lot crueler than they expected. The prodigal son said, I cannot wait till the day when I can get away from the rules of my dad. I will have real freedom. But he found out he had played the fool. Be careful what you ask for. It may not be what you really want. You see, authority is intended to bring order to society and protection to individuals. You may not like the police and think they are all power hungry, but would you really want to live in a country where there are no police? The Black Lives Matters crowd that wants to get rid of the police, that's idiotic is what that is. In fact, I'll help you tonight with the news. I very rarely say anything about current events, but I'll give you some hard truth tonight, and I will help you. So they've got these Democrats that are running. One of them is a gay mayor from South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg or whatever his name is, all right? And he's got a little problem on his hands. He had to run back home because a white police officer shot a black man out on patrol. Well, that's tragic. It's tragic for the man that got shot. It's tragic for the police officer that shot him. Nobody's a winner there. And so now they've got mobs in the street of South Bend, Indiana. Now, first of all, I hope that you don't think that what you saw on CNN tonight was the whole truth. I hope you don't think they're telling you the whole story, all right? Secondly, they elected a 37-year-old gay man to be their mayor. Now they're not happy with the way he handled the situation. Hey, you voted for him. You put him in office, all right? Furthermore, in St. Louis just the other night, a police officer is shot, killed, filmed while he's dying. Where's the mob outrage did that? The man that got shot in South Bend, I don't know anything about him, but from the reports I heard, he came at the police officer with a knife in his hand. Hey, I'm going to tell you young people something. I'm going to help you right now. If you ever do that, you're going to get shot. That's what's going to happen. If you ever come at me with a knife. Listen, our government is not perfect. Every branch is infested with crooks. I understand that. Some taxes are not fair. Some laws are not just. But would you really want to just get rid of it all and just everybody live by their own way? I don't think that's the way. Are you sure that anarchy would be better than the government that you disagree with if you are too hasty? If you're too hasty to get out of his sight, to get out from under authority, you're probably going to find out down the road it wasn't so bad under his authority. It wasn't so bad. He says in verse 4, he says, where the word of a king is, there is power. Who may say unto him, what doest thou? That king's got ultimate power. He can kill you or he can crown you. It's up to him. And you don't get away with questioning the king. You could get your head taken off your shoulders. And I'm not saying whether he's a good king or a bad king, whether he's right or wrong, but I'm making a statement that the king has all power. And here's what happens. When people cast off the authority of a government, they find out that then they're under another king and it's not any better. I'll give you an example of it. Israel. They looked at Pilate and they said, he is not our king, Jesus. We're not having him. And here's what they said. Caesar is our king. You know who the next Caesar was? It's Nero. We don't want the authority of King Jesus. We don't want him to be our king. No, we want out from under his authority. We want him to. Well, I'm going to tell you, I think it'd been a whole lot better for them under King Jesus than King Nero. In fact, I was reading several weeks ago the history of Germany. It's fascinating. I've never been. I'd love to go. Did you know that Germany used to be a monarchy? It was. The last king of Germany was a guy named Kaiser Wilhelm. He came from a 500-year dynasty of kings. So in Germany, there was a nobility class, dukes and grand dukes and princes, just like Great Britain. And then Germany lost World War I. And the nation put the blame on King Kaiser Wilhelm. He said, you're not a good king, you're weak, you're not a strong leader, you surrendered in the war too soon. So as soon as the war ended in 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm had to abandon the throne and go into exile. And that year, Germany voted to become a democracy. Because a democracy is so much better than a monarchy. We do not want to be under this king. And 15 years later, that democracy voted in Adolf Hitler. Kaiser Wilhelm may not have been a good king. I think they'd been better off just staying with the king that they had. Wisdom teaches you to submit to authority. Submit to authority. I'm going to stop right there. Stop right there. And I will let you study the rest of chapter 8. Because next week, Lord willing, Germany used to be a